Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined again by Jeffrey Robinson, and joined this week by Edward Pye. Ed, thanks for joining us. Always great to have someone else joining us on this podcast talking about Canadian rugby.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, as we do with any time we have someone new join on, we always have a few quick fire questions we like to throw their way. So, Ed, can you tell us how your rugby journey began?
Yeah, pretty much right out of the womb, straight onto the rugby pitch. My dad gave me a ball at 4 years old, and it was straight in onto the field. All my family have played rugby, so it was a pretty straight decision. No soccer or anything like that. It was basically here's a rugby ball and away you go. So I played rugby all through school. Played club level. I'm from New Zealand originally, so. Went into high school rugby and then club rugby in New Zealand. Then moved overseas in my 20s, played in Asia for 10 years in South Korea. And then have moved to Canada since met my wife over there. So moved over here and have been involved in the rugby community over here, both as a ref, a coach, and I still actually play old boys rugby over here in BC. And I've been here in Canada for 10 years now.
Right, pretty cool. Well, you mentioned basically the bigger family connection growing up. So, was there anyone in your family specifically, or maybe a coach from outside the family that was very influential in your rugby journey?
Yes, I still remember my dad playing. I went and saw him when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and still remember him playing for the Thames Valley Swamp Foxes, a real sort of heartland provincial team in the middle of New Zealand, real farming community. So very much entrenched in the rugby scene there, and just remember going to the clubhouse with him, and a real culture that you find with rugby communities all around the world. That was sort of one of my earlier memories with rugby. So my dad was a real big influence on me. I played a bit of rep rugby when I was younger for Auckland and North Harbour, and he was the one who would take me out onto the pitch and throw the ball around with me and just make sure I was developing my rugby skills in the right way.
Fantastic to hear. And you know, you obviously have Kiwi roots, you have affiliation with like South Korean rugby, and of course Canadian rugby now. Don't feel hamstrung that you have to choose one of these three nations. Open call for anyone. But who, when they step on the pitch or did step on the pitch, was someone that you always had to see every single time?
Yeah, I mean, growing up in New Zealand, you can't go past sort of the legends of New Zealand rugby, the Christian Cullens, when I was growing up, Glenn Osborne was one of the big sort of hot steppers. Rua Tupoki as well, one of the guys who I looked up to when I started playing, just because they had such good moves on the field. They were able to beat people really easily. So those were sort of key players that I looked to. Originally played more in the forwards when I was in New Zealand, but moving to Canada, I've been more in the backs. I think I was always a back at heart, so seeing those guys on the field was always great. And now these days, watching the sevens on the weekend, players like Georgia Miller, Michaela Brake, really inspiring to watch the ladies on the field as well.
Fantastic to hear, and a great segue into our first section of this episode because it's come around again. It's that favorite time of year out in BC. It was the Vancouver Sevens this past weekend, or should I say, the Van Sevens, because vowels are limited at the moment, I guess. Obviously, different from last year, just the women's team appearing in an official capacity. However, there was a men's invitational tournament, and we'll get onto that a little bit later as we talk about the women's success that happened this weekend. I pretty interesting pool stage. Started off with a 26-19 win over Brazil. That was pretty close. Or I'd say the scoreline was pretty close. I think Brazil picked up two tries at the death to, make it a bit more respectable, but it was a clear win for Canada. And speaking of clear wins, followed that up with a 41-5 win over Spain. And, at this stage, Canada looking top of the pool. Then, to the surprise of everyone, Brazil pulled off a shock win over Australia and were able to get some extra points on the board, which means that in the final pool stage for Canada, they had a 35-14 loss to Australia and somehow ended up third in the pool. Fortunately, they were the highest of the third place finishers, so they made it through to the quarterfinals for the cup, and they were up against, you know, the defending Olympic champions, New Zealand, and that was another tight loss of 34-12. And now, because of the structure of sevens as a whole, we don't have like playoffs for fifth to ninth. We just go on the ranking and then determine who's going for fifth and who's going for seventh. So that only meant there was one other game, and it was against the United States. Now, if I can cast your mind back to what would have only been 3 days ago, there was another match which was USA versus Canada, and I think the Canadian women they took a maple leaf out of Hockey Canada and were able to get that win over the United States. Final score 27-10, finishing seventh overall. Jeff, I'll start with you. How do you think the women did overall, and how do you think their season's going so far?
Well, I think so far they're doing pretty well. They've climbed up over the overall standings, and they're gonna hopefully avoid any relegation from the Seventh Circuit. It was a bit of a shame they couldn't tighten up against Brazil at the end. That could have helped them avoid a New Zealand quarterfinal.
Hmm.
But they did, as you said, came through at the end and beat the USA, which was great. So they're heading up the rankings, and hopefully they keep doing well and do well in Hong Kong sevens and keep moving forward. They're in I think a similar looking pool in Hong Kong with Australia, Japan, and I believe Spain. So hopefully they can at least finish top two there and get a easier path to a possible final there.
Yeah, that's true. Um, Ed, one thing I wanted to ask you is that so this time last year when we had the Vancouver Sevens, Canada were finishing uh, third, and obviously picking up a medal definitely helped. Obviously, seventh and third is not the same thing, but this is also the furthest Vancouver Sevens from the next Olympics. So, as Jeff was saying, they're finishing in the right place in the rankings to avoid that relegation battle. Were there any other Canadian players that stood out for you? I know that there was a few accolades mentioned, such as Charity Williams picking up a 100th try, and Asia Hogan Rochester scoring her 200th point on the seventh circuit. But was there anyone else who stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that Canada is uncovering some younger players. I mean, obviously they're going through a transition at the moment.
Hmm.
They're replacing a few of the legends of the female game. So Hogan Rochester, I think she's going to be the basis for the team. She's going to be their main attacking threat through the next 5, 10 years maybe. So it's good to see that they've uncovered her as an attacking weapon. You've got some other young players in there that have come through that I think will start to form the basis of the team going forward. There's a couple in the BC scene here as well that I think have real potential to crack the team in the next few coming years. So I'll be excited to see them. The Vancouver schedule and the way that the format is set up is pretty brutal. We've seen that with both the men's and the women's over previous Vancouver Sevens events, that you can go through and you can do quite well in your pool and still come in third based on other results. So it's unfortunate that they couldn't finish a little bit higher there, but excited to see what they'll bring for the next few years.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about relegation battles and the like, the men's were taking part, but not in the men's sevens series proper. There was this invitational tournament that was being held, featuring the men's teams from Trinidad and Tobago and Japan as well. And this was a pretty clear-cut demonstration of how the disparity between teams that have been on the Seven Circuit recently and those that haven't. So you're looking at Trinidad and Tobago. Of the two games they had there, they won with 50 or more points. The first game 55 to 12, the second one 50 to nil. And then against Japan, the closest game they had was a 33-12 victory for Canada, followed that up with a 51-12 win over Japan. And now, from the outside looking in, you can see that this is a, way to get the Canadian men's team on a big stage at home, especially. However, something to keep in mind is that Canada and Japan will be taking part in the Challenger Series with the intent of reaching the top four teams of the Challenger Series to take part in the promotion relegation matches that will be taking place when the Sevens conclude in Los Angeles. Um, Obviously, getting strong results over Japan is pretty good. But yeah, how do you think this warm up went for them, Jeff?
Like it, based on the scoreline, it went very well. I don't believe they suffered any injuries either, which is great.
Hmm.
I guess we discovered where Jamie Armstrong was, and he looked pretty good. Uh, so I was very happy with their performance, as you said, and I believe, as you said, next week they start with the Challenger Cup series, and I'm just happy to see that no one got hurt. They seem to get good runs. Defense tightened up, I believe, as they went on, which so they're again trending in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Ed, so we know that the Challenger Series for 2025 is going to be a doubleheader of back-to-back weekends in Cape Town, followed up by a round in Poland before the LA Sevens. And so do you think this puts Canada in good stead to be making it into the top four, top eight? And from what we've seen so far, could they even challenge to win one of the rounds of the Challenger Series?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, one of the other benefits of playing in this Vancouver tournament was giving exposure in a big tournament to some of the younger players, your Teals, your Reece James, who I've been involved a little bit with. He's actually from Kelowna, so I've been involved with him a little bit. Just getting them some runs on the board and getting them some game time in international games. So I think you definitely need to build that experience. You need to build those guys getting a run and actually getting some wins under their belts as well. That always helps with confidence. So if you can continue that momentum and continue building on that, that gives you something to work on when you come to these bigger tournaments. So hopefully we'll see that pay off in the Challenger Series.
Yeah, and as I said, that Challenger Series will be taking place both this coming weekend and the weekend after will be held in Cape Town. And yeah, the goal hopefully is that Canada will eventually get into the top four of the Challenger Series to rejoin the Seven Series for 2026. Um, but instead of going to South Africa, we're going to keep it in North America at the moment because we have had the first two rounds of Major League Rugby 2025. Now, because there were 11 teams, we can now guarantee that each team has played at least one game. Some have played two. And the season's been getting off well. I've seen, stats and posts on social media saying that despite all the law changes regarding scrums, there have been more scrums on average for the first round of 2025 than there was for 2024. Um, but this is a Canadian rugby podcast. We are focusing on Canadian rugby and the performances of both the players and the teams. So I'm going to throw this to Ed this time. Who have you seen over the past two rounds that have stood out in terms of Canadian performance?
Yeah, so I want to focus a little bit on some of the forwards that are performing in there. The first guy to mention, I think, for me is Mason Fletch, playing. I think he's mainly been playing at six for the Chicago Hounds, in tandem with Lucas Rumble as well, which is always good to have two of your main international players playing on the same club team. But he did have a big game against Utah. He was a great line out option in that game. and he ended up being the top tackler in the game with 12 tackles. Um, he's 6'5", 105 kgs. So if you're Canada and you're thinking of playing someone like Lucas Rumble at 8, which I don't think he's an 8 personally. I think he's a better 7 than he is an 8. But he has been used at 8 before, and he does do well on the carry. He had some strong carries through some of those games. But if you are playing him at 8, he's a little bit smaller. So having someone like Flesh, who's a bigger body, who can win lineouts, he's a great option for Canada to have, maybe playing at 6. Good ball carrier, good technical player as well. So I definitely think he's one to watch. Some of the other players that I had highlighted were Cali Martinez. Now
Hmm.
he's only got a few caps for Canada, the prop. Um, he does look a little unfit to me. Like he did 50 minutes in his most recent game. Does look a little unfit, but it does appear to be quite a good scrummager. So, if we're talking about MLR devaluing the scrums, maybe his work's not going to shine as much there. But we've got to remember that the international game hasn't changed those laws. So the scrum is every bit as valuable in the international game as it's ever been. So having someone who can scrummage well, that's going to certainly help Canada in the long run. So Kelly Martinez is another name I had down there, and then a couple of backs playing for LA there. Purdy and Shaw managed both to get on the scoreboard. Finished off chances well. Purdy was involved in a few different situations where he made the right decision. So not sure if they'll be starters or where they sit in the depth chart, but certainly putting their names into the conversation.
Yeah. If I could
Mm, yep.
ask one question, how do you feel Kelly went at tight head? Because I believe last season he was mostly loose head, and
Yeah, and he did
yeah, it was
he
very
did actually.
interesting watching him that at tight head. Yes.
Yeah, certainly having a prop that can play both sides of the scrum is that's a huge string in your bow for any prop, and it gives you a lot of versatility in how you make your selections with a squad. So being able to play both positions is definitely helpful for Canada. I did see a couple of scrums where he was quite strong. He was getting underneath his opposition prop and like putting them up, and he actually got a few penalties out of that. So it seemed to be a strong performance.
Well, Jeff, which players have stood out for you so far in MLR?
I would just want to give a shout out for Justice Sears Doo for getting a try and a great 20-meter run in from a ruck, and it was great to see him get on the scoreboard again. Great to see him being active too. He got subbed off early second half. I guess that was a lesson.
Mm.
Don't score late first half. But other than that, it was good to see him. Cooper Coates is someone I hope to see at either 15 or 10 for the national team. I thought he had a bit of a quiet week one. The ball just didn't seem to go his way. And sometimes that happens, but also when you're not being noticed on the pitch, that does, sorry, that is not always a bad thing either. That also means you're not making mistakes too. But he was definitely a lot more involved in their attack in week two, which was great to see. And well, Stephen Jones at 12, that's another position for Canada where there is a bit of an opening for the national team. And he also scored a try. And I think he did well on both sides of the ball in the back line for Utah.
And he's a big body too, Spencer
Yeah.
Jones. I think we talk about the ability to break through the midfield, create that attacking momentum. He's a bigger body, good runner, someone who could serve Canada well in that position.
Yeah. I still hope to see later in the season Jones 12, Casey 13 partnership for Utah and just see how that goes and if a partnership for the national team is brewing there.
And Cooper Coates had a phenomenal game in the game where he topped just about every stats metric that they had on that one. He was the number one on almost every metric that they had. So great game from him.
All right, yeah. I think for me personally, so one of the things that we've joked about on this podcast before is that the Free Jacks are basically Canada South. They have the most Canadians of any team in MLR at the moment with 14. And So obviously a lot of guys putting their hands up to be recognized. But one thing that happened during the off season was that their head coach left, and so they have been put in the position of how are they going to cope with a new coach coming in and basically taking the reins. I obviously know that they promoted from within for the coach, and yeah, on paper, it looks pretty good. I mean, their only game they played so far was against LA. Final score 17 to 24, getting a try bonus point as well. But overall, their possession was down. They had very little territory. I mean, obviously, getting four tries definitely helps. One thing that really held them back was that, especially in the second half, John Poland missed two conversions, which would have obviously put them a bit further ahead and would have ensured that LA left their first game of the season with nothing. But also, as well, we had like a huge discipline issue towards the end of the game. I mean, 10 minutes to go, you get a yellow card for Isaac Olsen. So that's Canadian representation. And then 3 minutes before the end, Jed Melvin gets a red. So you're down to 13 players for the rest of the game. So, I mean, yes, Olsen did come back on for like the final minute, but if LA had been able to score a try, that would have been a real back foot for the defending champions. But no, it's a good representation overall. Like Piers von Dadelsen, getting 19 tackles in the game, the fourth highest of any player on the pitch. And for the other side, um, we had Andrew Coe not only making the most meters, but having two clean breaks as well. So definitely setting up try scoring opportunities. Um,
He had a great offload that set up one of LA's tries. For sure.
exactly. So yeah, Canadian contributions always great to see, always fantastic. I think Seth Purdy also had good stake in both this game and the second of LA's fixtures. So yeah, I mean, obviously, New England have only had one game so far, so it's very little to really talk about as a team overall. I'm, I can see like growing pains, but I can also see like opportunities for teams to definitely get their stake at the defending champions. Obviously, because of the way the playoff structure is working, um, I can clearly see New England making it to another playoff series. But going all the way this time, I'm not 100% sure on that. I think it depends on how soon they can tighten up some of their issues, especially discipline, which, to be honest, is an issue for the entire league as well, right? I think like Chicago picked up like a number of cards as well. I know that James Dealey, our friends at North American or MLR Stats and North American Rugby Database keep tabs on this, and it's you know more cards than hallmarks at this point. Um, but yeah, I think once they can get discipline sorted down, and you know, we'll see as the season goes on, and hopefully next time I'm talking, they'll have hopefully played three games by this point. But get more guys on the more opportunities for the Canadian players, and yeah, it should be definitely interesting to see how everything goes.
And one last thing for
Yeah.
New England, as yeah, Kyle Bailey to the rescue, maybe.
Oh yes, of course, Kyle
It's
Bailey
fun.
has re-signed with New England.
Couple of
And
questions there on New England guys. Where are I think they've got four or five Canadian locks. How come none of those guys are playing at the moment? Are they all injured?
Kyle Bailey just signed or
Okay.
re-signed.
yeah,
Uh, and one has started. Josh, not
Josh
sure.
Lawson.
Josh Larson, yeah.
Larson, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause he was a former captain. Maybe he's still hurt. Maybe still has a niggle.
You've got to think they're stronger with those international players starting at lock. So you'd hope to hopefully see them.
Mm.
The other thing that I think is good, even though Olsen had the card at the end there, it's great to see players from the Pacific Pride coming through into the MLR because that pathway is obviously doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. You've got Olsen there and Kochar as well. I think started on the weekend as well. So a couple of players coming through that Pride pathway.
Yeah. Well, as Piers van Dadelsen started for New England in their game, but yeah, I definitely something to keep an eye out for. But this is the thing is that with all this Canadian talent, you're hoping that it's getting out on the field, just getting more experience there. And but yeah, as I said, this is only the first game of New England season. Hopefully, by the time we get to like the nine halfway point of nine. Uh, yeah, 9 games under their the ninth round, sorry, and 8 games under their belt. Hopefully more Canadians getting opportunities and stuff. I mean, wasn't it Noah Bain was on the bench for New England, and then the next week he's over in Vancouver. So and now heading off to South Africa. So this is a guy. Noah's clearly a guy who likes to travel around as much as he can, coast to coast to cross Atlantic, and yeah, because I have a feeling that a lot of guys in MLR or contracted at MLR are playing with the Sevens Challenger Series, and hopefully they'll be back in a couple of weeks' time to play for their teams, and then obviously they'll be playing again in April and May for hopefully the return to the men's series. But let's move on because very interestingly, there were no Saturday games in week two. Now, as a fan of the Six Nations, I would have loved to have had 2 games on Saturday morning and then immediately lead into a number of games for MLR. But that was disappointing not to have. And now in round three, we have 2 games that are starting at the same time, which is Utah versus NOLA and Old Glory DC versus San Diego Legion. Both of these on the MLR website are set to start at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, I think this is an issue that has been around for as long as MLR has been around, and it's really irritating, especially when these games start at the same time, even though they're in different time zones as well. Um, and now, annoyingly, the thing it comes down to at the end of the day is money and the TV contract of the broadcaster saying we have this slot available, that's when you're playing. And MLR having a deal with ESPN, fantastic. Not an issue for me. Um, but obviously having this conflict of you have to place the games at certain times and they overlap. And I know sometimes it comes through on local broadcasters versus domestic broadcasters having this conflict. But I think the league needs to be in a position where it can start pushing back on these and having more sequential flow of the games. Um, Ed, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the broadcasting has improved year over year with MLR. We've gone from, sort of a bit of wonky camera work to improving that. The commentary standards have improved. In terms of the broadcast all round, I think that has improved. And I think we're still on that upward trend. I think you're right. I think, there's going to have to come some point where they start to push back on scheduling because yeah, having games lined up at the same time not great for viewers, and you want to increase your viewership. So certainly having games scheduled one after the other at least is a start there.
What do you make of it, Jeff? Are you irritated by this, or do you just have picture in picture and watch both at the same
I
time?
I'm well, I'm very irritated by this. It's hard to always focus, and I have 2 iPads, so sometimes I have one on one game, one on the other at the same time. So, but I think I do agree with Edward that the quality has improved of, like you said, the cameramanship, the commentary, all that has improved, but the scheduling has always been an issue in that regard, even before ESPN. And I understand some of it will be due to stadium availability. Others is the weather in the US, like in the deep south, like New Orleans. Can they really have games or Miami? Can they really have games earlier in the afternoon? They probably need to go later in the afternoon. Is there some way where they could have like Chicago a bit earlier in the day, maybe? Where especially now, where that's probably better for the players, and then have Miami later in that day to try to get that staggered start and no overlap. Because you mentioned, I believe in week three, there's two games starting at the same time, and I checked for week four, there's going to be two games with an hour overlap, and I believe the viewership. I hope it's getting better. I assume it is now that they're on ESPN as well, but how many of these rugby fans are rugby fans to one specific team and not to a sport as a whole right now? And you probably want these people being able to watch the whole games
Mm.
too.
I
Like,
think the other consideration coming in is the venue attendance because, if you've got your club rugby being played during the day, you want to be able to schedule the games where as many people can actually come along to the game. So there's a balance to walk there between who's watching it online or on TV versus who's actually at the stadium.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, and hopefully in future seasons this can be resolved. I guess for the time being, we'll just have to watch picture in picture here in Canada. And if you, viewers and listeners, are interested in watching any of those games, you can watch the MLR on the Rugby Network. It's signed up for free, and because you're in Canada, it is free live broadcast available for all Canadians. If you want to watch any other rugby games, while we don't have confirmation at the moment, there is a contract between Rugby Canada and TSN, so it's likely that TSN Plus will be showing the Challenger Series. And although follow us on social media to stay up to date on that. It is the second and final bye week of the Six Nations, but when it returns, it will be available to watch on DAZN. Uh, we all, because it's a bye week, we have the return of the Premiership and the URC that is available on Sportsnet Plus, and the Premiership Women's Rugby will be in its final few stages, and that is available on the Rugby Network Plus. And if you enjoy this episode, be sure to check out more as well as our written pieces on our website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find our podcast directly on Spotify. We also have a YouTube channel at the Rouge Rugby. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all our videos. We're also available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and Blue Sky, all at the Rouge Rugby. Jeff, where can people find you on social media?
you can find me on X at WP Rugby Jeff.
And Ed, where can the fine people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on all of the social media channels under Rugby 101. I've got a new channel on YouTube started up there. We're going to look at a few different things with an academic slant as well. So Rugby 101.
Fantastic. And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, that's where we're going to end this episode. Jeff, Ed, thank you for joining me, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Rouge Rugby Podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.